The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining the third webinar in the Grantee Orientation Series, Launching Your AFI Project, Savings, Economic Education, and Asset Purchase. In this webinar, you will learn about basic AFI fundamentals and requirements that relate to the savings, economic education, and asset purchase stages of the typical client journey. So this webinar will be led by myself, Stephanie Landry, a program manager at CFED, and Alicia Hadley, a senior program associate at CFED. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. You have the choice of dialing in with your phone or listening to the webinar through your computer. Select the appropriate audio option on the GoToWebinar control panel. You can ask a question at any time by using the chat box on your GoToWebinar control panel. If you are watching this live and experience any technical difficulties, please type a question into the GoToWebinar interface or email us at slandry@cfed.org and we will help you troubleshoot them. Please keep in mind that this webinar is being recorded. We've muted all attendees to ensure sound quality, so if you have any questions or issues, please type them into the query box. We will make a recording and transcript of this presentation available on the IDA Resources website, the address of which is on your screens, at a later date. This webinar will last approximately 90 minutes with time for questions and answers in the middle and at the end. Feel free to type those questions into the box at any time. So in the last webinar, you learned about the requirements and practical considerations around the recruitment, enrollment, and application phases. If you missed that webinar, go to the AFI Resource Center to view the slides, transcript, and recording. You need to know those basics since you will be using them from the beginning of the project. Today, we will continue our review of AFI program fundamentals and requirements. We will discuss AFI requirements of the savings, economic education, and asset purchase phases, and practical considerations to think about as you design these phases. Finally, we will share insights on how you can utilize policies and procedures and client-facing paperwork throughout your AFI project. This webinar will provide you with the guidance and tools to be successful. First, we'll detail the AFI requirements that all grantees must follow and practical considerations to think about while following these requirements. This illustration depicts the typical stages a participant completes during his or her IDA journey. Although not all AFI IDA projects follow the exact course of steps laid out in the image on your screen, the 6 stages in a common AFI IDA project are recruitment, application, enrollment, economic education, saving, and asset purchase. It may be helpful to think about your project design in terms of all the steps an IDA participant takes. In this webinar, we will focus on the requirements AFI has for grantees for the second 3 of these stages: economic education, savings, and asset purchase. We will then offer some practical considerations as you begin to think about how best to design these stages for your IDA project. You'll note that the text on the slides is sometimes black and sometimes orange. The black font indicates AFI requirements. These are things you must follow to be in compliance. The orange text indicates practical considerations. These are not requirements, but are important to think about as you implement your AFI grant. All AFI grantees must manage their project in accordance with the AFI Act and federal grants policies, including the HHS Grants Policy Statement. Links to these resources are shown on your screen. And now I will turn things over to Alicia to get us started.
Hi everyone. Today we'll start with economic education. Over the next several slides, we'll talk about the requirements and considerations you see on your screen. The requirement around economic education period is to assist participants in obtaining the skills and information necessary to achieve economic self-sufficiency. These considerations include services provided, timing, and method. The AFI legislation directs the AFI program to consider specific capacities of entities that apply for an AFI funding award, which include how well the award applicant has presented a full array of support available to its potential participants to successfully purchase a qualified asset, as well as the experience and capacity of the award applicant in working with potentially eligible individuals, as well as the applicant's ability to offer support services. Once an award applicant has become a grantee, the AFI legislation directs the grantee to assist participants in obtaining the skills and information necessary to achieve economic self-sufficiency. Please note that the AFI legislation addresses expectations of the grantee to offer services that will support its project participants. The AFI legislation is silent on expectations of the participant related to taking advantage of those services. AFI does not set details of economic education requirements. Your AFI grant application included a proposal of these services. Be sure to review and adhere to your accepted application. Successful projects commonly offer general financial education in addition to asset-specific education to participants. However you choose to provide financial education, be sure that the participants acquire the skills they need to manage their money and save during the IDA process, as well as maintain their asset after purchase. When designing your financial education program, you should consider the following: the number of hours required for both general and asset-specific training. It is important to strike a good balance with your education requirements. You want your participants to be able to learn about personal finance and tools they will need to succeed with their asset purchases. But you also don't want to overburden them and set up barriers that keep them from completing the program. Next, consider the curriculum. The curriculum that you choose will be very important to helping your target population succeed. It is important that the curriculum you choose is appropriate for your target population and take into account language and other cultural issues. Other factors in choosing a curriculum include literacy levels, age, and life experience. Finally, consider delivery method. Will your financial education be delivered online, in person, or a combination of the two? Once again, you should consider what works best for your target population. For example, if you serve a rural population where it would be very burdensome for participants to come to an in-person training, you may want to allow participants to complete some or all of their financial education online. Or it may suit your population best to have an in-person financial education training taught by an experienced instructor. Lastly, you should consider a provider, whether IDA, project staff, or an outside organization. If you have capacity within your organization, you may want to provide financial education in-house. If not, you may need to partner with a financial education provider in the community. This provider must be skilled and have an understanding of the target population and be culturally sensitive and aware. Some financial institution partners may have staff that are available and able to deliver financial education as well. Also, consider the schedule, availability, and frequency of supportive services offered. Again, it is important to strike a good balance and not make these requirements burdensome, while also helping savers gain the skills and knowledge to build their financial wellness. Whatever the answers to these questions, they should be detailed in the Savings Plan Agreement and reviewed with all IDA holders. The link in the slide will provide you with resources to plan and deliver financial education for your AFI IDA participants. Some economic education and support services that grantees commonly provide, either directly or through referrals or partnership arrangements, are shown on this slide. The first one you see is supportive services, such as financial counseling or coaching or post-purchase support. This provides an opportunity to deliver tailored support to each participant, including defining and making mid-savings adjustments with participants on their savings plans, addressing any individual issues, such as debt, that may impede successful asset purchase, navigating the asset purchase process, and providing access to resources post-purchase. The second one you see is asset-specific education. This helps to ensure that participants are ready for purchasing, owning, and maintaining the asset for the long term. Asset-specific training focuses on home ownership, for example, visiting a housing counselor, small business development, for example, taking business development courses, or preparing for post-secondary education. for example, visiting a guidance counselor. Please note, if a participant has a business capitalization goal, they are required to prepare a business plan and have that plan reviewed by a qualified entity. Grantees should have a plan to connect business IDA holders with qualified support services. We'll talk about this requirement a little bit later in more detail. The final thing you see on your screen is savings, monitoring, and supports are also held to the discretion, which are also held up to the discretion of the grantee. Missed deposits may signal that an account holder is struggling and may jeopardize his or her ability to make an asset purchase within a 5-year project period. Regular communication with participants and the availability of support services help them navigate these challenges and avoid emergency withdrawals if possible, ultimately staying on track for asset purchases. Now we'll switch back to Stephanie to talk about considerations for savings.
Great, thanks Alicia. So the next step in our journey is the savings period. Over the next several slides, we'll talk about the requirements and considerations you see on your screen. Requirements around the savings period include deposits coming from earned income, match rates, limitations on match rates, providing match deposits quarterly, and emergency withdrawals. The considerations include verifying earned income, setting match rates, choosing a parallel account structure, and monitoring savings progress. First, let's talk about earned income. The requirement is that participants may only deposit earned income into their IDAs. This means that participants cannot deposit money received from government benefits or child support into their IDAs. For example, TANF funds do not count as earned income. The consideration is around how and when you verify that your participants have earned income. Grantees commonly verify the availability of earned income for deposits during the eligibility screening. Remember that this does not mean eligible applicants without earned income cannot open an AFI IDA. Perhaps this client is also enrolling in a workforce development program and so anticipates having earned income soon. That person may open an AFI IDA as long as they pass the income and wealth eligibility requirements. However, they cannot begin saving in their IDA until they have secured earned income. Another key AFI program requirement is the match rate. Grantees must match participants' earned income IDA deposits with the combined federal and non-federal project funds. There are 3 key requirements around the match rate. First, grantees may set the match rate within the following range: at least $1 and as much as $8 of project funds for each dollar of participant savings. Second, at least $1 of non-federal funds must be used to match participant savings for every $1 of federal funds used to match participant savings. And finally, no more than $2,000 of the federal funds from one AFI grant may be provided to one individual, and no more than $4,000 to one household. No matter what the match rate, a single participant can only be matched up to a maximum of $2,000 in federal funds per grant. Now for some considerations around setting your match rate. This table shows how varying your match rate affects the amount that a participant has to save to attain the full federal and non-federal matches. Setting your match rate at an appropriate level for your project and your participants is critical for success. 2 things to keep in mind. First, as you determine your match rate, consider that setting it too low may hinder your participants from saving enough money to purchase their asset goal. And second, the match rate can be set at different rates for the 3 different types of IDAs: homeownership, education, or business. Communicating the different rates to participants is very important so there is a clear understanding that if they move from one type of IDA to another, the match rate may change. When setting your match rate, you need to balance the realistic cost of the asset, your participants' ability to save, the length of time they will have to save, and the total number and types of asset purchases your project is committed to. The first link in the slide offers ways to think about this balance as you review the match rate for your project. Another thing to know is that grantees may formally request to change their match rates during the course of the 5-year project period. To make any design change official, you must make a request to your AFI program specialist. There is a template for a design change request with supporting questions to help you prepare. You can find this template and description of the request process at the second link on this slide. The next requirement is around grantees' obligation to provide match deposits. At all times during the savings process, there must be sufficient funds to match the savings of the current IDA holders. Be aware that AFI grants operate under a different set of cash management rules than most grants. Section 410 requires grantees to match participant deposits with federal funds not less than once every 3 months, either by depositing the match funds into the participant savings account, into one parallel account, or into individual parallel accounts. Therefore, grantees must have sufficient federal and non-federal cash on hand to cover obligations to participants. Grantees are to obligate match funds to the IDA holders as the match funds accrue, not just at asset purchase. For example, if you have 5 participants who have saved a total of $3,000 at the end of quarter 1, and your match rate is 3-to-1, you transfer $9,000 to the parallel account for that quarter, proportionately obligating the amount of the match to each IDA holder. That $9,000 is an equal combination of $4,500 in federal funds and $4,500 in non-federal funds. The minimum requirement is to transfer funds quarterly. You may transfer more often if you like. There are 3 different methods to match funds. Grantees can deposit match funds directly into the participant's IDA account. However, this is not a common practice because it becomes logistically cumbersome. Grantees can also deposit match funds into parallel accounts, either one for all participants or one parallel account for each participant. A single parallel account to allocate participants' match funds every 3 months is preferred for logistical reasons instead of a parallel match funds account for each participant. This parallel account serves an important purpose. It helps ensure that you are tracking your IDA holder savings activity on a regular basis and have sufficient federal and non-federal funds on hand to cover the total potential match for each account holder. Deciding how you handle the disbursement of obligated match funds is an important project management decision, both from the aspect of internal efficiencies of project management as well as meeting your commitment to your IDA holders and the AFI program. There are some common considerations for developing and using your parallel account with internal and external stakeholders. First, working with your financial institution partner. When setting up your project's parallel account, be sure to discuss the following considerations with your financial institution partner. Matched withdrawals will be made out of the parallel account, and transfers will be made at least quarterly between the reserve fund and the parallel account. Discuss how the transfers and withdrawals will be made and be aware of any associated fees or limitations. Sometimes financial institutions waive transactional fees related to these projects. Consider requesting this of your partner if appropriate. Next, working with your organization's finance staff. Prepare your finance team to oversee the parallel account by discussing the following considerations. The parallel account may build up a significant balance over the life of your 5-year AFI grant. At least 85% of federal and non-federal funds remain unexpended until participants make their asset purchases. Match withdrawals will be made directly from the parallel account. And information from the parallel account will help when completing the SF-425, the standard form required for semi-annual financial reporting, as using the parallel account correctly helps you to clearly keep track of obligated and unobligated match funds. We will discuss the SF-425 and other reporting requirements during the next webinar. Now we'll talk about the requirements around emergency withdrawals. IDA participants may withdraw all or a portion of their savings from their IDA for an emergency. These emergency withdrawals may only be for the following 3 reasons. First, medical care for the account holder, a spouse, or dependents of the account holder. Second, housing payments that prevent eviction or foreclosure of the account holder's primary residence. Or third, necessary living expenses of an account holder following loss of employment. Account holders must pay back what they withdrew. The amount withdrawn must be returned into the IDA no later than 12 months after the date of emergency withdrawal. If the account holder does not reimburse the amount withdrawn within that period, the grantee is expected to rescind the match funds previously obligated for this amount. Grantees are expected to review these emergency withdrawal requests on a case-by-case basis and to create a process for withdrawal as well as reimbursement. There are two main considerations grantees should think through around emergency withdrawals: the timeline and other support you could provide to participants seeking an emergency withdrawal. First, the timeline. The AFI legislation allows for emergency withdrawals to be redeposited within 12 months. However, be sure to consider your project period end date. If your grant is ending in 6 months, you may have to require participants redeposit their funds more quickly. And other support. Many grantees build support services around their IDAs, such as regularly engaging participants who are not saving as planned, which could prevent participants from seeking emergency withdrawals in the first place, or offering those seeking an emergency withdrawal alternative resources to address the emergency in lieu of a savings withdrawal. There are a couple other considerations grantees should think about that will impact the participant savings period. How savings occurs and is monitored is up to the grantee organization's discretion. AFI only requires that participant savings derive from earned income and that they participate in your project for a minimum of 6 months before making a withdrawal for asset purchase. AFI does not have a requirement around monthly, regular, or lump sum deposits. Any requirements around the frequency and amount of deposits is up to the grantee. You may decide that it is very important to your project for participants to develop a savings habit and therefore require monthly deposits. Or you may want to be more flexible and individualize the deposit requirement based on your IDA participants' life circumstances or irregular income patterns. You may choose to allow large lump sum deposits. Grantees commonly allow for these around tax time. And it is also important to monitor your participant savings progress closely. Missed deposits or deposits at less than the targets you agree upon in your savings plan agreement may signal that an account holder is struggling and may jeopardize his or her ability to make an asset purchase within the 5-year project period. Regular communication with participants allows you to help them navigate challenges and ultimately stay on track for asset purchases. So we know that's a lot of information, so we're going to break here to see if you have any questions around the requirements and considerations in the asset purchase. I'm sorry, before we move on to the asset purchase phase, to see if you have any questions around the savings and economic education phases. If you do, go ahead and type those questions right into the query box on your GoToWebinar interface. All right, so we do have a couple questions coming in. So one says, you stated beforehand that only $4,000 per household can be used. Would a husband and wife qualify separately? So the way that this requirement works is that $2,000 of federal funds or $4,000 of federal funds can be used. The $2,000 is for an individual, the $4,000 is for a household, and those are the maximums. So a husband and wife could both have an IDA account. They would have to have separate accounts and each have their own earned income that they could deposit into that account. And as long as they meet the other income and net worth eligibility requirements, that would be fine. And let's see, we have another question about if IDAs need to be some type of custodial or trust accounts and what the specific requirements around the type of account is. So the important thing to know about these IDA accounts is that they need to be withdrawal restricted. It's important that the name of your organization as well as the name of the participant is on these accounts so that participants can't withdraw their savings except with your permission, with your written permission, whether that's at an emergency withdrawal time or whether it's at an asset purchase time. And so the way that grantees commonly set this up is, like the question asked, either a custodial or a trust account. And that way you can make sure that with your financial institution partner that participants won't be able to access their funds without your expressed written permission. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section. For those of you whose questions I did not answer, I will go ahead and reach out to you individually after this webinar. As we keep on going through these stages and the requirements, keep typing your questions into that query box. And so now I will turn things back over to Alicia.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. As you can see up on the screen, the last step in the participant journey is asset purchase. Over the next several slides, we will address the requirements and considerations of asset purchase that you can see on your screen. Requirements around the asset purchase period include withdrawal of funds in the 6-month minimum, qualified asset purchases, qualified payments, and the business plan. Considerations include executing matched withdrawals, the number and frequency of matched withdrawals, and transferring to a dependent. Withdrawals from the IDA are limited to 2 purposes. Asset purchase, which we'll talk about more in detail in the next couple of slides, and to cover expenses in specific emergency situations, which we just discussed. All withdrawals must be approved in writing in advance by a responsible official at the grantee organization. No withdrawals for asset purchases may be made from the IDA for the first 6 months from the date of opening the account. AFI allows for 3 asset savings goals. First home purchase, post-secondary education or training, or business capitalization. Grantees can choose to offer 1, 2, or all 3 of these qualified assets in their projects. Additionally, a few savers will choose to transfer their IDAs to a dependent or spouse to be used for one of these 3 asset purchases. Each asset purchase goal has more specific requirements in the legislation, which we'll discuss on the next couple of slides. Participants saving for post-secondary education expenses may use their matched withdrawals for tuition and fees required for the enrollment or attendance of a student, and fees, books, supplies, as well as equipment required for courses. The matched withdrawals should be paid directly to an eligible educational institution, which is an institution of higher education or post-secondary vocational education school, as defined in the Higher Education Act of 1965 and the Carl D. Perkins Vocational and Applied Technology Education Act. Next, first home purchases. These AFI IDA funds may only be used for a first-time home buyer, which is a person who has no present ownership interest in a principal residence and has not had such ownership in a home for the previous 3 years from the date of acquisition of a home with the IDA. For first-time home purchases, savings and match can be used for the account holder's main residence where the acquisition costs do not exceed 120% of the average area purchase price for a similar residence. Qualified costs mean those for acquisition, construction, or reconstruction of the residence, as well as any usual or reasonable settlement, finances, or other closing costs. The IDA funds may be paid directly to the persons whom the amounts are due. And last, business capitalization expenses. These funds may only be used for a qualified business, which is one that operates legally and does not violate any law or public policy. Business IDA savings and match may only be dispersed with an approved business plan, which we'll talk about more on the next slide. The expenditures of the IDA become qualified expenses when they are included in the business plan. Expenses may include capital, plant, equipment, working capital, and inventory, but are not limited to these. These funds should be paid directly to a business capitalization account established in a federally insured or state insured if federally insured is not available, financial institution, and restricted to use for qualified business capitalization expenses. Business IDA savings and match may only be dispersed with an approved business plan. The expenditures of the IDA become qualified expenses when they are included in this business plan. The qualified business plan must be approved by either a financial institution, a microenterprise development organization, or a nonprofit loan fund. A qualified plan includes a description of services or goods to be sold, a marketing plan, and projected financial statements. The plan may also require the IDA holder to be assisted by an experienced business advisor. Finally, transfer to IDAs of family members. IDA savings and correlated match can be paid directly into the IDA of the account holder's spouse or a dependent, which is defined by whether the account holder would be allowed to deduct under Section 151 of the IRS Code of 1986. So to recap, we just reviewed the AFI Act specific requirements for each asset type and each asset purchase. Grantees build their match withdrawal procedures around these requirements and commonly use several review steps to ensure compliance. These review steps include creating and using withdrawal request forms that all participants complete. These forms often also ask for specific supporting documentation. Another step is reviewing and approving the purchase request and document. For this step, you should consider your internal process to check the request forms for accuracy and compliance with all requirements. Additionally, grantees include a finance staff review of the request and confirmation of balances in the parallel account to pay the match amount. You will then work with your financial institution partner to cut checks or initiate electronic fund transfers of both participant savings in the IDA and commensurate match from the parallel account. Another useful step is grantee program staff following up with participants to ensure that the purchase was completed and to ask for any post-purchase information. There are other considerations that affect grantee organizations' processes governing asset purchases, including the number and frequency of match withdrawals. Participants saving for post-secondary education and business capitalization commonly make multiple match withdrawals. Participants buying homes typically make one at the time of purchase. Some participants may wait to make a match withdrawal until after they have reached their savings cap, while others may request withdrawals along the way, using their available balance and requisite match. They then continue to save and make another withdrawal using only a portion of the total maximum savings allowed. AFI grantee staff must monitor these types of transactions consistently to ensure that those making multiple withdrawals do not exceed the federal match limit of $2,000. You should also consider when there might be times in the year with a higher number of withdrawal requests and ensure that your staff are fully prepared. For example, post-secondary education savers commonly request match when tuition is due, which is typically in August through September and January and December. The second consideration that you see on the screen is the transfer of savings of an IDA of a family member. AFI grantees find this allowable use to be especially valuable when working with youth. The parents or guardians may open the IDA initially and save towards the maximum allowed And then, as the young person nears the age of attending a post-secondary educational program, the IDA is transferred to him or her for match savings withdrawals related to tuition fees and other school expenses. Finally, although the asset purchase is the last step of the IDA program, there are several steps you can take earlier, starting at the time of participants' enrollment, to minimize the challenges or obstacles to successful asset purchase. Here are examples of practices some grantees use. Explain the match withdrawal and account asset purchase process in the savings plan agreement and other project documents. Provide a detailed checklist of the documents required for each asset purchase to help participants organize their paperwork in advance. Monitor participant savings progress and talk with those who are nearing their goal about the process for making a match withdrawal and about asset-related support services. For example, homeownership readiness classes or technical assistance related to entrepreneurship. Make sure the approved and matched fund payment processes are timely, because participants often have a deadline related to their asset purchase. For example, registration in the first day of classes for those with a post-secondary education program. Have a formal project exit process and ensure that you get proper authorization to close participants' IDAs and handle leftover savings, if any. That completes a review of the AFI requirements and considerations. Again, we know this is a lot of information, but it's important to be aware of the requirements of the later stages even at the beginning of your grant so you can be fully prepared. I will now hand it over to Stephanie to discuss policies and paperwork.
Great, thanks Alicia. So the last thing we'll discuss on this webinar is developing internal policies and procedures and external paperwork. AFI projects that do well take time to think through and write down policies and procedures early in the game. A policy is a principle to guide decisions and achieve intended outcomes. As a statement of intent, it is implemented as a procedure. Once policies are established, you should write procedures describing how your organization implements its policies as well. Written internal AFI IDA project policies are important because they ensure that processes and rules are clear and applied consistently for all participants. They also help create institutional memory so that if there is staff turnover, new staff can quickly get up to speed on the project policies. These policies should include requirements of the AFI project as well as your internal requirements based on your project design. Through this orientation series, we've made mention of various policies, procedures, and paperwork that grantees should consider. This slide lays out several key areas for which you should have written policies and procedures, including participant eligibility, proof of earned income and application requirements, asset-specific requirements, a business plan approval process, economic education requirements, savings monitoring and case management, procedures for withdrawals, both qualified asset purchases, emergencies, and termination, data collection, partnership and oversight, and an agency policy for participant complaints. And here are some of the key paperwork or forms your participants will likely have to use at some point while participating in your AFI project, including perhaps a pre-screening eligibility tool, an application including net worth calculation form, an account opening form from your financial institution partner, a savings plan agreement, an emergency withdrawal form, and an asset purchase withdrawal form. There are many resources available at the AFI Resource Center to help you create your policies, procedures, and paperwork. Some of those resources are linked on your screen. So we know that's a lot of information, so we're at the end of the content and we just wanted to see what questions you all have. So go ahead and type your questions into the query box and we'll see which ones we can answer. We do have a couple coming in. One person asks if the IDA can be purchased in several segments. For example, could a student use it for 2 different tuition costs spanning 2 semesters? And the answer is yes. Your participants can certainly make multiple asset purchases. This is this is not terribly common for home ownership because generally it's one big withdrawal and purchase for closing costs or something like that. But for students, grantees commonly will make multiple asset purchases for tuition of different semesters. Just always keep in mind your timing. You have the participant needs to have the account open and saving for at least 6 months, and you have your 5-year project period to complete these asset purchases. And also be very careful with that maximum amount that we've talked about, that $2,000 of federal funds per person per grant. If your participants are making multiple asset withdrawals, just make sure that you're aware of where they are and that they're not exceeding that maximum amount. All right, so we've got a question about matching participants' deposits quarterly in that parallel account structure. This person wants to know about the logistical complications that make it less advisable to deposit our match directly into the IDAs. So again, to remind you, there are 3 different options to provide this match deposit quarterly. One is directly into the participant IDAs. One is one parallel account for all of your participants. And then the last is individual parallel accounts for each participant. So grantees do not often, and we would not recommend depositing that match directly into the participant IDAs because for a couple of reasons, one of which the participants then could potentially access those funds. Even if you have the account set up as, you know, a custodial account or a trust account, there's always that potential for human error and that your participant would be able to withdraw their match funds without your permission. And it's really important as a grantee that you maintain your fiduciary responsibility for these funds into the AFI program. The second is that that's a lot of transfers that you're going to make quarterly. Depending on how many participants you have, you could be making, you know, hundreds of transfers every quarter from your reserve fund into each of those accounts. And then you'll also have to, in the event that a participant makes an emergency withdrawal, you would have to transfer any obligated match amounts out of their IDA account and back to the reserve account quarterly. So typically we see grantees using one large parallel account so that it's one transfer each quarter and that it's just the net amount that your participants have saved and withdrawn. So a couple more questions coming in. One is asking if you have to have tax forms to verify income. The legislation does not specifically lay out what specific documentation that you need to have to show that you made sure your participants are eligible. Grantees typically will save pay stubs from their participants. Tax forms are especially helpful for looking at if the participants have qualified for EITC, which, as you might remember from our previous webinars, is one of the ways to pass that income test. So tax forms can be really helpful because they have a lot of information at the household level, but the AFI legislation does not specifically require grantees to collect those forms, just that you have in some way verified and documented eligibility. So one question about how funds typically move from the parallel accounts to the participants. And so this is specific to each grantee. The process varies a little bit, and it's going to be a process that you should talk about with your finance staff and also your financial institution partner. Typically, what I've seen at grantees is one withdrawal being made from the parallel account for the match dollars and another withdrawal being made from the participant IDA. So this could potentially mean, you know, 2 checks that get issued to either the school or the business capitalization account, or whoever those closing costs or whatever they happen to be go to for home ownership. There are also ways to do it with wire transfers or electronic funds, but that, like I said, the process is specific to each grantee and how you set it up with your finance team staff and your financial institution partner. A question around generally how long do most grantees allow their participants to draw down their funds? For example, 2 years from the first deposit date, and especially in regards to education participants. This again is something that varies widely by the grantees. The only requirement within the AFI legislation is that the IDA account must be open for 6 months from the initial deposit. So the amount of time that AFI projects require their participants to save could be a minimum of 6 months, and really the maximum up to your project period, as long as you build in enough time for people to actually complete their assets. Generally speaking, as far as education participants go, I've seen things as short as 6 months, where it's like a really quick turnaround and you have youth saving, over maybe the summer and a couple more months, and then immediately cashing out for their fall tuition. And then I have seen projects that do longer, 1 or 2 years, depending on the participant and their ability to save. So this is also something that's really specific to the grantee. All right, so there are a couple more questions out there that are a little bit specific to the grantee who has posed that question. So for those of you whose questions I did not get to, I will reach out to you individually after this webinar. Just wanted to remind you all about the 4th and final webinar in the Grantee Orientation Series before we sign off today. And if you have any remaining questions, go ahead and type those in over the next slide or two. So webinar 4 on data and reporting will be held on Wednesday, December 14th, and will explain the types of reports you are required to file and the reporting dates. The webinar will also include a discussion of using data to manage your project. So please tune into that one. And as always, we just wanted to provide you once again with the contact information for the AFI Resource Center, which is really a great place to go with your questions. Great, and I don't see any more questions coming in at the tail end. So we just wanted to thank you all so much for participating, and enjoy the rest of your day.